I was halfway through clearing Mrs. Henderson's driveway when my phone buzzed with a notification that would change everything about my relationship with the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association forever. The snow had started falling at 2 in the morning on that bitter January night in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and by 6 when I woke up, we already had 8 inches on the ground with another 6 predicted before noon. I owned a landscaping business, and during winter months, snow removal kept my bills paid and my crew employed. My truck was equipped with a heavy-duty plow blade, and I had contracts with about 30 properties around the city, but Pine Ridge wasn't one of them. Pine Ridge was where I lived. I had bought my house there 3 years ago, a modest 3-bedroom ranch on Maple Court, and I had watched the HOA drama unfold from a careful distance ever since. The association was run by a woman named Patricia Whitmore, a 52-year-old retired real estate agent who treated the neighborhood covenants like they were the 10 Commandments handed down from God himself. She had short blonde hair that she kept in that aggressive bob cut that seemed designed to intimidate, and she drove a white Lexus SUV with a vanity plate that read PNURG 1. Pride in the neighborhood, I guess, though most of us just called it overbearing. I had managed to stay off her radar mostly by keeping my lawn immaculate during summer and my Christmas lights tasteful and removed by January 2nd. My landscaping truck usually sat in my garage overnight, and I parked my regular vehicle in the driveway like everyone else. No violations, no fines, no drama. But that morning was different. The snow was coming down so hard that the city plows couldn't keep up, and I knew from experience that Pine Ridge would be one of the last neighborhoods they reached. We were tucked away off the main roads, a development of about 60 homes that branched off from Eastern Avenue, and the city always prioritized the main arteries first. I had already gotten texts from 3 of my elderly neighbors asking if I could help them out. Mrs. Henderson was 83 and lived alone 2 houses down from me. Mr. and Mrs. Yamamoto were both in their 70s and had a medical appointment they couldn't miss. The Johnsons had a newborn and were panicking about being snowed in. I wasn't going to charge any of them. These were my neighbors, my community, and I had the equipment and the ability to help. So I fired up my truck at 6:30, the big diesel engine rumbling to life in the quiet dawn, and I started working. Mrs. Henderson first, then the Yamamotos, then the Johnsons. As I worked, other neighbors started coming out, asking if I could do their driveways too. Some offered to pay, but I waved them off. The snow was still falling, and I figured if I was already out here, I might as well make sure everyone could at least get out if they needed to. By 9 in the morning, I had cleared about 15 driveways. My truck was parked at an angle in the street while I finished up the Chen's driveway, the blade angled to push snow into the growing piles along the curb. That's when I saw the white Lexus crawling down the street, moving slowly through the snow I hadn't cleared yet on the main road through the neighborhood. Patricia Whitmore pulled up beside my truck and rolled down her window. The look on her face could have frozen the snow all over again. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You can't park that vehicle in the street. It's a violation of the HOA Covenants, Section 12, Subsection 4. Commercial vehicles are prohibited from parking on neighborhood streets." I stopped what I was doing and walked over, my boots crunching through the 6 inches of fresh powder. "Morning, Patricia. I'm not really parking. I'm plowing driveways for people who need help." "That doesn't matter," she said, her eyes narrowing. "The covenants are clear. No commercial vehicles on the streets. You need to move it immediately or you'll be receiving a violation notice and a fine." I looked around at the neighborhood, at the snow still falling, at the driveways I'd already cleared and the ones I still planned to do. You realize the city hasn't plowed through here yet, right? People need to get out for work, for appointments, for emergencies. I'm helping our neighbors for free. That's very charitable of you, Patricia said in a tone that suggested it was anything but the rules exist for a reason. They maintain property values and neighborhood aesthetics. Your truck is an eyesore and it's blocking the street. I'm not blocking anything. There's plenty of room for cars to get around. That's not the point, she snapped. The point is that you're in violation. Now, are you going to move it, or do I need to call a tow truck? I felt my jaw clench. You're going to call a tow truck on me for helping people dig out of a snowstorm. I'm going to enforce the covenants that everyone in this neighborhood agreed to follow when they purchased their homes, she said. You included, Mr. Nolan, or should I call you Kevin? Either way, you signed those papers. My name is Keith, I said flatly. I had lived here for 3 years and she still couldn't remember my first name. And yeah, I signed them. I also remember reading something in there about the HOA being responsible for snow removal on the common areas and streets during winter weather events. Her face went red. The HOA contracts with a service provider for that, and they'll be here when they can get here. When's that going to be? Tomorrow? Next week? Mrs. Henderson is 83 years old and she needs to get to the pharmacy today. That's not my problem, Patricia said coldly. She should have planned better. Now move your truck or I'm calling the tow company. You have 5 minutes. She rolled up her window and drove off before I could respond, her Lexus fishtailing slightly as she accelerated through the unplowed snow. I stood there for a moment, watching her taillights disappear around the corner, my breath forming clouds in the cold air. Mr. Chen came walking over from his driveway, an apologetic look on his face. I'm sorry you had to deal with that, he said. That woman is impossible. It's fine, I muttered, though it wasn't. Let me finish your driveway and then I'll move. You don't have to. We appreciate what you're doing. Everyone does. I did finish his driveway, and then I plowed my way back to my own house and pulled the truck into my driveway, the blade scraping against the concrete as I angled it up. My garage was full of equipment and supplies for the business, so the truck had to sit outside, but at least it was off the street. I went inside, made some coffee, and tried to let it go. I had other clients who were actually paying me to deal with today, and I needed to get to them. But before I could finish my first cup, my phone buzzed again. It was an email from the Pine Ridge HOA, sent to my official homeowner email address at 9:47 in the morning. The subject line read, "Violation Notice and Fine Assessment." I opened it, already knowing it was going to make me angry. Dear homeowner, you are hereby notified that on January 14, 2026, at approximately 9:00 a.m., your property was found in violation of Pine Ridge HOA Covenants, Section 12, Subsection 4, which prohibits the parking of commercial vehicles on neighborhood streets. Photographic evidence has been collected and attached to this notice. As a first-time violation of this section, you are being assessed a fine of $250, payable within 30 days. Failure to pay will result in additional penalties and potential legal action. If you wish to contest this violation, you may request a hearing before the HOA board within 14 days of this notice. Sincerely, Patricia Whitmore, HOA President. Attached to the email were 3 photos of my truck parked on the street, clearly showing the plow blade and the logo on the door for my company, Nolan Landscaping and Snow Removal. $250 for helping my neighbors during a snowstorm. I set my coffee down harder than I intended and pulled up the HOA covenants on my computer. I had a PDF saved from when I bought the house, and I started reading through the snow removal section carefully. Section 8 covered maintenance responsibilities, and subsection 3 was about winter weather. It read, "The HOA shall maintain all common areas including streets, sidewalks, and shared driveways during winter weather events. Snow removal shall be contracted to a professional service and costs shall be covered by HOA dues. Response time for snow removal shall not exceed 12 hours from the end of active snowfall for events accumulating 4 inches or more." I checked the weather forecast. Snow was supposed to stop around 11 in the morning. That meant the HOA's contracted service should have all the streets cleared by 11 that night, which was already going to be too late for most people who needed to get out today. Then I read further and found Section 23, which covered emergency services and resident assistance. Subsection 7 stated, "Nothing in these covenants shall be construed to prevent residents from providing emergency assistance to other residents during crisis situations, including but not limited to medical emergencies, fire, flood, or severe weather events." I wasn't a lawyer, but that seemed pretty clear to me. I had been providing emergency assistance during a severe weather event. The commercial vehicle rule shouldn't apply. I forwarded the violation email to my personal attorney, a guy named Marcus Brennan, who handled my business contracts and had helped me with some other legal stuff over the years. I added a note explaining the situation and asking if he thought I had grounds to fight this. His response came back within an hour. "Definitely contest this. The emergency provision should supersede the parking rule. Request the hearing and I'll go with you. Also, document everything you did this morning, including who you helped and the timing. Get written statements from the neighbors if possible. This is absurd." So that's what I did. I spent the rest of the afternoon documenting everything while also running out to handle my paying clients. I took photos of the street conditions, the piles of snow, the lack of any HOA snow removal activity. I texted all the neighbors I had helped and asked if they'd be willing to write a quick statement about what I did and why they needed the help. Every single one of them said yes immediately, and several of them added colorful comments about Patricia and the HOA board. Mrs. Henderson's statement was my favorite. "Keith Nolan plowed my driveway free of charge on the morning of January 14, when I desperately needed to get to the pharmacy for my heart medication. The city hadn't plowed our streets yet, and the HOA service was nowhere to be seen. Keith is a blessing to this neighborhood, and Patricia Whitmore should be thanking him instead of fining him. She's a menace and always has been." I compiled all of this into a folder and sent it to Marcus, then drafted my formal request for a hearing. The HOA rules required them to schedule it within 30 days of the request, and it had to be held at a time when the homeowner could reasonably attend. I submitted the request that evening, expecting to wait a few days for a response. Instead, I got an email back within 2 hours from Patricia herself. "Your hearing has been scheduled for January 21 at 7 p.m. in the Pine Ridge Community Center. You may bring one representative or advisor. The board will review your case and render a decision. Attendance is mandatory or the fine will automatically be upheld and doubled." January 21st was exactly 1 week away. She wasn't wasting any time. The snow stopped around noon like the forecast predicted, and by that evening, the city had finally made it through Pine Ridge and cleared the main roads. The HOA's contracted service showed up around 8 at night. A single guy in a pickup truck with a small plow blade that looked like it came from a hardware store. He made a few half-hearted passes through the neighborhood and left, leaving the streets still covered in packed snow and ice in several spots. I got up the next morning to find another email from the HOA. This one was sent to all residents and was marked Community Notice. Dear Pine Ridge residents, it has come to the board's attention that some individuals have been operating commercial businesses within the neighborhood without proper authorization. This includes, but is not limited to, snow removal services. Please be advised that hiring unlicensed, uninsured operators for work within the community violates HOA regulations and could result in liability issues should accidents or damage occur. The HOA has contracted with professional, fully insured services for all community needs. Please use only approved vendors for any work within Pine Ridge. A list of approved vendors is available on the HOA website. I read it 3 times, my anger building with each pass. She was calling me unlicensed and uninsured. My business was fully licensed with the state of Michigan. I carried $1 million in general liability insurance, and I had all the proper commercial vehicle registration and bonding. This was borderline slander. I called Marcus immediately. "Did you see the email?" I asked when he picked up. "The community notice." "Yeah, I saw it. She's trying to paint you as some kind of liability risk. It's complete nonsense and she knows it. Do you have copies of all your licensing and insurance documents?" "Of course I do." "Good. Bring them to the hearing. We're going to bury her with documentation. This is actually helping our case because she's clearly on some kind of vendetta here. You think she's doing this deliberately?" "Keith, she fined you for helping people during a snowstorm, and now she's sending out emails implying you're some kind of shady, unlicensed operator." "Yeah, I'd say it's deliberate. The question is why. Have you had any run-ins with her before?" "No. I barely know the woman. I keep my head down, follow the rules, stay out of HOA drama." "Well, you're in it now," Marcus said dryly. "Let me do some digging into the HOA's history. I want to see if there's a pattern of this kind of behavior. In the meantime, don't engage with her. Don't respond to the emails. Don't try to argue with her if you see her. Everything goes through the formal hearing process now." I agreed and hung up, but staying quiet was harder than it sounded. Over the next few days, I started hearing from neighbors who had seen the email and were furious on my behalf. The Johnsons came over with a casserole and an apology for dragging me into this. Mr. Yamamoto stopped me at the mailbox and told me he was planning to attend the hearing to speak on my behalf. Even people I barely knew were reaching out to offer support. It turned out Patricia wasn't very popular in Pine Ridge, and this was just the latest in a long series of petty power trips and questionable enforcement actions. I heard stories about fines for mailboxes being the wrong shade of black, violations for parking commercial vehicles even for brief periods like florists delivering arrangements, and one case where she had tried to fine someone for having a vegetable garden visible from the street because it violated the aesthetic standards. Most people paid the fines and grumbled, not wanting the hassle of fighting. But I was running a business and couldn't afford to have my reputation smeared with implications that I was unlicensed or uninsured. More than that, I was just plain angry about the injustice of it all. The days crawled by. We got another smaller snowstorm on January 17th, about 3 inches, and this time I made sure my truck never left my driveway. I still helped a few neighbors by hand with snow shovels, which wasn't against any HOA rule as far as I could tell, but I wasn't taking any chances. The HOA's contracted service showed up about 6 hours after that snow stopped, which was technically within their 12-hour window, but still slow enough that most people had already dug themselves out or called someone else. January 21st arrived cold and clear. The hearing was scheduled for 7 that evening, and Marcus arrived at my house at 6:30 so we could go over everything one more time. "Remember," he said, "stay calm, stick to the facts, and let me do most of the talking. They're going to try to make this about rule following and order in the community. We need to make it about common sense and the emergency exception clause. Got it? And if Patricia starts going off on some tangent or making personal attacks, do not engage. Let me handle it." We drove to the community center together, a small building near the entrance to Pine Ridge that the HOA used for meetings and events. When we walked in at 6:55, the meeting room was already packed. The HOA board sat at a long table at the front. Patricia in the center, flanked by 4 other board members I recognized vaguely from around the neighborhood. There were about 30 residents sitting in the folding chairs that had been set up, way more than I expected for what I thought would be a routine hearing. Patricia's eyes narrowed when she saw the crowd, but she didn't comment on it. She banged a gavel on the table at exactly 7 o'clock. "This hearing will come to order. We're here tonight to address the violation notice issued to Keith Nolan of 847 Maple Court regarding the parking of a commercial vehicle on neighborhood streets in violation of Section 12, subsection 4 of the Pine Ridge Covenants. Mr. Nolan has requested a hearing to contest this violation. Mr. Nolan, you and your representative may come forward." Marcus and I walked to the front and sat in the 2 chairs that had been set up facing the board table. Marcus set down his briefcase and pulled out a folder of documents. "Thank you for holding this hearing," Marcus began. "I'm Marcus Brennan, attorney for Mr. Nolan. We're here tonight because my client received a $250 fine for providing emergency snow removal assistance to his neighbors during a significant winter storm. We believe this fine is not only unjust, but also explicitly contradicted by the HOA's own covenants." Patricia interrupted immediately. "The covenants are very clear about commercial vehicles. There's no ambiguity. If I may finish," Marcus said calmly. "Section 12, subsection 4 does indeed restrict commercial vehicle parking. However, Section 23, subsection 7 specifically exempts actions taken to provide emergency assistance during crisis situations, including severe weather events. On the morning of January 14th, Mr. Nolan was providing such assistance. That section refers to things like administering CPR or calling 911, Patricia said dismissively, not running a business out of your pickup truck. The language says including but not limited to medical emergencies, fire, flood, or severe weather events," Marcus countered. "The including but not limited to clause means the list is not exhaustive. It's illustrative, and severe weather events are explicitly mentioned." One of the other board members, a man named Donald Pritchard, spoke up. "Even if we accepted that interpretation, how do we know this was actually an emergency? People get snow in Michigan every winter." Marcus opened the folder and pulled out several sheets. "I'm glad you asked. We have documented weather reports showing that Grand Rapids received 14 inches of snow between 2 a.m. and noon on January 14th. We have photographs showing street conditions as of 9 a.m. when the violation occurred. We have the city's own snow removal logs showing they didn't reach Pine Ridge until after 6 p.m. that evening, and we have sworn statements from 8 residents explaining why they needed immediate assistance that morning." He passed copies to each board member. Patricia barely glanced at hers. "Mrs. Henderson needed to get to the pharmacy for critical heart medication," Marcus continued. "The Yamamotos had a medical appointment for Mrs. Yamamoto's cancer treatment follow-up. The Johnsons had a newborn with a pediatrician appointment. These weren't conveniences. These were genuine needs, and Mr. Nolan stepped up to help when the HOA's contracted service was nowhere to be found. Our service responded within the contractually required time frame, Patricia snapped. Barely, Marcus said. And only after my client had already helped over a dozen residents. Speaking of which, where was that contracted service during the morning when people actually needed help? The contract says 12 hours from the end of active snowfall. Snow stopped at 11 a.m. That means the deadline was 11 p.m., but you're treating that as acceptable. It's within the rules, another board member, a woman named Susan Cole, said defensively. Maybe legally, Marcus said, but is it serving the community? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like a resident went above and beyond to help his neighbors during a crisis. And instead of thanking him, the HOA is punishing him for a technicality while simultaneously sending out emails questioning his licensing and insurance. Patricia's face flushed. Those emails were about general liability concerns. Those emails specifically mentioned the events of January 14th and implied that residents who accepted help were somehow at risk, Marcus said, his voice hardening. For the record, here are copies of Mr. Nolan's business license, his commercial vehicle registration, his general liability insurance certificate showing $1 million in coverage, and his commercial auto insurance. He's fully licensed, fully insured, and fully qualified. The implication otherwise is defamatory. He slapped another set of documents on the table in front of Patricia. She stared at them like they might bite her. This is ridiculous, she said. We're not here to debate the community email. We're here about a parking violation. No, Marcus said firmly. We're here because you issued a punitive fine to someone for helping people, and I think everyone in this room can see that. There was a murmur of agreement from the residents sitting behind us. Patricia banged her gavel. Order. The audience will remain silent or I'll clear the room. Actually, said Donald Pritchard, HOA hearings are open to residents per the bylaws. You can't clear the room unless there's a disruption. Patricia shot him a venomous look but didn't argue. Instead, she turned back to Marcus and me. Fine. You've made your argument. Do you have anything else to add? Just this, Marcus said. The emergency exception clause exists for exactly this type of situation. If the board upholds this fine, you're effectively telling residents that following the letter of the law is more important than helping their neighbors in crisis. You're also opening yourselves up to a pretty clear-cut lawsuit for improper fine assessment and defamation. I would strongly encourage the board to dismiss this violation and issue a formal apology. Patricia's jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscle twitching. The board will take the matter under advisement. We'll render a decision within 5 business days. This hearing is adjourned. She banged the gavel again before anyone could say anything else, and the board members started gathering their papers. The residents in the audience immediately started talking, many of them coming up to me and Marcus to offer support and encouragement. Mrs. Henderson grabbed my hand with both of hers. You give them hell, dear. What they're doing to you is shameful. Mr. Yamamoto clapped me on the shoulder. If they don't dismiss this, we're bringing it up at the next general membership meeting. A lot of us are fed up with Patricia's nonsense. As people filtered out, I noticed Patricia standing by the door, watching everyone leave with a tight expression. When she saw me looking, she turned away abruptly and disappeared into a side office. Marcus and I drove back to my house, and he seemed cautiously optimistic. I think we made our case pretty effectively, he said. The other board members looked uncomfortable, and that Pritchard guy seemed almost sympathetic. Patricia's the problem, but she can't decide this unilaterally. It needs a majority vote. So you think they'll dismiss it? I think they'd be idiots not to, but I've seen HOA boards do dumber things. We'll know in a few days. 3 business days later, on January 26th, I got the board's decision via email. After careful review of the evidence and arguments presented, the Pine Ridge HOA Board has voted to uphold the violation notice issued to Keith Nolan. While the board acknowledges Mr. Nolan's good intentions in assisting neighbors, the commercial vehicle parking restrictions exist to maintain neighborhood standards and must be enforced consistently. The fine of $250 remains in effect and must be paid within 30 days of the original notice date. This decision is final unless appealed to the full HOA membership. The vote breakdown was included. Patricia voted to uphold, Susan Cole voted to uphold, and 3 board members voted to dismiss. But because Patricia was the president, she got a tiebreaker vote, which she used to uphold the fine. I called Marcus immediately. They upheld it. I saw, he said. He sounded annoyed. Patricia really wants this fight. Okay, here's what we do. The bylaws allow you to appeal to the full membership. That means everyone in Pine Ridge gets to vote on whether the fine stands. We need to get on the agenda for the next general meeting. When's that? Quarterly meetings are required, so there should be one coming up in the next month or 2. Let me check the schedule. He called me back 20 minutes later. Good news and bad news. The next general meeting is scheduled for March 15th. That's after your payment deadline, which means Patricia will probably try to add late fees and penalties before we can get this resolved. Can she do that? Technically, yes, if you don't pay. But if the membership overturns the fine, those penalties would be reversed. The question is whether you want to pay under protest to avoid the extra fees, or let it ride and fight the whole thing at once. I thought about it. $250 was annoying but not devastating. The principle of the thing mattered more than the money. Let it ride, I said. If she wants to add penalties for a bogus fine, that's just more ammunition when we go to the membership. That's what I'd do, Marcus agreed. I'll draft the appeal petition and we'll submit it. In the meantime, document any other issues with HOA snow removal or enforcement inconsistencies. If we're going to bring this to the full community, we might as well make it count. February came in cold and snowy. We got several more winter storms, and each time I made absolutely sure to keep my truck either in my garage or parked in my driveway. I didn't help anyone with snow removal, even when people asked, because I couldn't risk giving Patricia more ammunition. The HOA's contracted service continued to be mediocre at best. They'd show up eventually, but always near the end of the contractual window, and the quality of work was poor. Streets were left with patches of packed snow. Sidewalks in the common areas often weren't cleared at all, and I watched multiple residents slip and fall on icy walkways that should have been treated. I documented all of it. Photos, timestamps, weather reports, complaints from neighbors. I was building a case that went beyond just my fine and spoke to a larger pattern of poor service and selective enforcement. On February 13th, I got another email from Patricia. My payment deadline had passed, and she was adding a $50 late fee plus $10 per day until the fine was paid. According to her math, I now owed $340 and counting. Marcus just laughed when I forwarded it to him. She's really digging herself in. Keep the emails. Every one of these makes our case stronger. The appeal was officially added to the agenda for the March 15th general meeting. The HOA was required to notify all residents at least 2 weeks in advance, which meant the notice went out on March 1st. That's when things got interesting. Patricia sent out the meeting agenda to all residents, and my appeal was listed as item 5 out of 7. But she also included a summary of the situation that was so biased it was almost comical. Item 5. Appeal of Commercial Vehicle Parking Violation by Keith Nolan. Mr. Nolan is appealing a fine issued for parking a commercial landscaping truck on neighborhood streets in violation of HOA covenants. The board upheld this fine after a hearing in January. Mr. Nolan claims he was providing emergency assistance, but multiple residents have complained about commercial vehicles in the neighborhood, and the board must enforce rules consistently to maintain property values and community standards. The bit about multiple residents complaining was news to me, and I suspected it was news to most of the neighborhood too. I immediately got texts from several people asking what she was talking about because they'd never complained about my truck. Mr. Yamamoto sent a scorching email to the entire HOA membership list, something I didn't even know residents could do, calling out Patricia's summary as misleading and explaining what had actually happened. Mrs. Henderson followed up with her own email supporting me. Then the Johnsons, then the Chens, then at least a dozen others. By March 5th, the HOA email list had turned into an all-out war zone, with residents taking sides and arguing about everything from snow removal to Patricia's leadership, to whether the HOA covenants needed to be completely revised. Patricia tried to shut down the email thread by claiming it was being used for inappropriate purposes, but that just made people angrier. A group of residents organized a petition calling for Patricia's removal as president and got 42 signatures out of 60 households. That petition got submitted to the board on March 10th along with a demand that it be added to the meeting agenda. Patricia refused, claiming the bylaws didn't allow for midterm removal of officers except in cases of malfeasance or violation of fiduciary duty. The residents who submitted the petition argued that selective enforcement and abuse of authority qualified, but Patricia held firm. The tension in the neighborhood was thick enough to cut with a knife. I saw Patricia around a few times, and she wouldn't even make eye contact. Other board members looked stressed and uncomfortable. Susan Cole, who had voted with Patricia to uphold my fine, actually came to my house to apologize. I shouldn't have voted that way, she admitted, standing on my porch looking miserable. Patricia convinced me it was about maintaining standards, but I didn't realize how much good you'd actually done that day. A lot of people have told me how much they appreciated your help. I'm going to vote to overturn the fine at the meeting. I appreciate that, I said, meaning it. This got way bigger than I ever intended. That's because it's not really about you anymore, Susan said. It's about how Patricia runs things. People are fed up, and this was just the final straw. I'm probably going to resign from the board after this. I don't want to be part of this drama anymore. The night of March 15th arrived with the kind of nervous energy usually reserved for elections or championship games. Marcus and I arrived at the community center at 6:45 for the 7 o'clock meeting, and the parking lot was already packed. We had to park on the street, inside. Every seat was taken and people were standing along the walls. I'd never seen this many residents at an HOA meeting. Usually, these things drew maybe 10 or 15 people. Tonight, there had to be at least 50. Patricia sat at the board table looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. The other 4 board members looked equally uncomfortable. When 7 o'clock hit, she banged the gavel reluctantly. This general meeting of the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association will come to order. We have a long agenda tonight, so let's keep things moving. First item is approval of the minutes from the last meeting. Point of order, someone called from the audience. It was Donald Pritchard. I move that we table the routine items and go straight to item 5 and the petition for leadership change. Those are what everyone's here for. There was a murmur of agreement from the crowd. Patricia's face went red. That's not how we do things. We follow the agenda in order. The bylaws allow the membership to modify the agenda by majority vote, Pritchard said. I'm making that motion. Do I have a second? Second. At least 5 people called out simultaneously. All in favor? Pritchard asked. A forest of hands went up. Patricia looked around the room, saw she was completely outnumbered, and banged the gavel angrily. Fine. We'll skip to item 5. Keith Nolan's appeal of his parking violation fine. Mr. Nolan, you have 10 minutes to present your case. Marcus stood up. If I may, the board already heard Mr. Nolan's case at the January hearing. The membership received copies of that testimony in the meeting materials. Instead of rehashing the same arguments, I'd like to propose that we open the floor for general discussion and then move to a vote. That's highly irregular, Patricia protested. But not prohibited, Marcus said. The membership can structure their debate however they want. Patricia looked like she wanted to argue more but clearly knew she'd lose another vote. Fine. The floor is open for discussion. Mrs. Henderson's hand shot up immediately, and Patricia had no choice but to recognize her. I'm Alina Henderson, and I've lived in Pine Ridge for 22 years, she began, her voice strong despite her age. On January 14th, I needed to get to the pharmacy for medication that keeps me alive. The streets weren't plowed, the HOA service was nowhere to be found, and I was stuck. Keith Nolan showed up at my house with his plow truck and cleared my driveway for free, asking for nothing in return. He probably saved my life that day. The idea that he should be fined for that is absurd and cruel. I vote to overturn this fine, and I think Patricia Whitmore should apologize to him publicly. Applause broke out. Patricia banged her gavel, but it didn't stop until it died naturally. Mr. Yamamoto went next. My wife is a cancer survivor. She had a follow-up appointment that morning that we could not miss. Keith made sure we could get there. He helped us and a dozen other families because it was the right thing to do. This fine is unjust. More applause. Person after person stood up to speak in my favor, sharing stories about that morning and other times I'd helped around the neighborhood. Some people also took the opportunity to air grievances about Patricia's leadership style and the HOA's general management. Patricia tried to maintain control, but she was losing the room completely. At one point, she attempted to shut down discussion by claiming people were going off topic, but Donald Pritchard reminded her that membership meetings allowed for open debate on matters before the body. Finally, after about 30 minutes of discussion, Marcus suggested calling the vote. All those in favor of overturning Keith Nolan's parking violation fine and dismissing all associated penalties, please raise your hands. I turned around in my seat and counted. 46 hands went up. All those in favor of upholding the fine, 3 hands. Patricia's, Susan Cole's, even though she'd said she'd vote to overturn, and one other person I didn't recognize. The fine is overturned by membership vote, Marcus announced. Per the bylaws, this decision supersedes the board's ruling and is final. The room erupted in applause again. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't fully realized I was carrying. It wasn't about the money. It was about being vindicated, about the community seeing what had actually happened and deciding I'd done the right thing, but we weren't done yet. Next item, Donald Pritchard called out. The petition for removal of Patricia Whitmore as HOA president. I'd like to move that we address this now. Patricia banged her gavel so hard I thought it might break. Absolutely not. That petition was not properly submitted per the bylaws. It's not on the official agenda and we're not discussing it. Actually, Marcus said, standing up again, I reviewed the bylaws, and there's a provision for emergency removal of officers by membership vote if 30% of households petition for it. You received a petition with 42 signatures out of 60 households. That's 70%. The provision requires it be addressed at the next available general meeting. That provision is for malfeasance, Patricia shot back. Not because people don't like enforcement decisions. It's for abuse of authority which has been clearly demonstrated, Pritchard said. You issued a fine for emergency assistance. You sent defamatory emails implying a licensed business owner was operating illegally. You've been selectively enforcing rules for years. Multiple residents are prepared to testify about uneven enforcement. This isn't about one parking violation. It's about a pattern of behavior. The room was dead silent now, everyone watching Patricia. Her face had gone from red to almost purple, and her hands were shaking. "This is a witch hunt," she said, her voice tight. "I've volunteered countless hours to this community. I've maintained property values and enforced standards that keep this neighborhood desirable. And this is the thanks I get. You fine people for having vegetable gardens and mailboxes the wrong shade of black," someone called from the audience. You tried to charge the Hendersons for having their grandkids' toys in the yard during a visit. You threatened to lien Mrs. Chen's house over a garden gnome. That's not maintaining property values. That's being a petty tyrant. More voices joined in, sharing their own stories of questionable fines and aggressive enforcement. Patricia tried to gavel them down, but it was hopeless. She'd lost the room entirely. Finally, Marcus spoke up again. "Given the clear sentiment here, I suggest we move to a vote on the removal petition. If it fails, Patricia remains as president and this matter is settled. If it succeeds, the board will need to elect a new president from among the remaining members. Let's put this to bed one way or the other." Patricia looked at the other board members, perhaps hoping for support, but they all avoided her gaze. Even Susan Cole, who had been her ally, looked away. "Fine," Patricia said bitterly. "Call your vote. Let's get this farce over with." "All those in favor of removing Patricia Whitmore as HOA president, raise your hands," Pritchard said. I counted again. 48 hands went up, nearly everyone in the room. All opposed, 5 hands, including Patricia's. "The motion carries," Pritchard announced. Patricia Whitmore is removed as HOA president, effective immediately. The board will convene after this meeting to elect a new president. Patricia sat frozen for a moment, her gavel still in her hand. Then she stood abruptly, grabbed her purse, and walked out of the room without another word. The door slammed behind her hard enough to rattle the frame. The meeting continued for another hour as the remaining board members reorganized. Donald Pritchard was elected as the new president by unanimous vote of the remaining 4 members. He immediately made a motion to issue a formal apology to me and to review all fines issued in the past 2 years for potential improper enforcement. He also moved to terminate the contract with the current snow removal service and open bidding for a new provider. When someone suggested just hiring me since I lived in the neighborhood and clearly knew what I was doing, I had to speak up. "I appreciate the vote of confidence," I said, "but I've already got more snow removal clients than I can handle most days. What I'd be happy to do is provide the HOA with a list of reliable contractors I know and trust. I'll even help review bids to make sure you're getting a fair price and good service." That offer was accepted enthusiastically, and the meeting finally wrapped up around 9:30. As people filtered out, nearly everyone stopped to shake my hand or thank me for standing up to Patricia. It was overwhelming and humbling at the same time. Mrs. Henderson gave me a long hug. "You did good, dear. This neighborhood needed someone to finally put their foot down." Marcus and I drove back to my house, both of us exhausted but satisfied. "That was something," he said. "I've been to a lot of HOA meetings but never one quite that dramatic." "You think Patricia's going to cause more trouble?" I asked. "I doubt it. She's embarrassed and angry, but she doesn't have any authority anymore. The worst she can do is complain to her friends. Keep your documentation, though, just in case she tries something petty." She tried something petty. 2 days after the meeting, I got a certified letter at my house. It was from Patricia's personal attorney, a guy named Richard Carlson, and it was demanding payment of the original fine, plus all penalties on the grounds that the membership vote was conducted improperly and should be invalidated. The letter claimed that the bylaws required 2 weeks' notice before any membership votes on officer removal, and since the petition wasn't formally on the agenda, the vote was illegitimate. It also claimed that my fine overturn was rushed through without proper procedure and should be reinstated. I forwarded it to Marcus, who called me back laughing. "This is desperate and going nowhere," he said. "The membership vote on your fine was perfectly legitimate. The officer removal happened at a general meeting with proper notice, and the petition met all requirements. Her lawyer is throwing mud to see what sticks, probably because she's paying him to. Ignore it." Should I respond at all? I'll send a letter back explaining why his arguments are wrong and suggesting he advise his client to drop this before she wastes more money on legal fees. "But you personally don't need to do anything." Marcus sent that letter, and we never heard back from Patricia's attorney. I did hear through the neighborhood grapevine that Patricia was telling people she was the victim of a conspiracy and that I had manipulated everyone against her. Most people rolled their eyes and moved on. The new HOA board under Donald Pritchard turned out to be dramatically better. They hired a professional management company to handle day-to-day enforcement and communications, taking a lot of the personal drama out of things. The snow removal contract went to a reliable company I recommended, and service improved immediately. In April, the board passed a formal resolution clarifying that the emergency assistance clause in the covenants explicitly allowed residents to help each other during crisis situations without fear of fines, as long as they weren't operating a business for profit within the neighborhood. It was common sense, but it was good to have it in writing. Patricia ended up selling her house in June and moving out of Pine Ridge entirely. I heard she bought a condo in a different part of Grand Rapids, somewhere without an HOA. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The resolution also included a formal letter of apology to me, signed by all remaining board members and posted in the community newsletter. It acknowledged that the fine had been unjust and thanked me for my volunteer service during the January snowstorm. I framed that letter and hung it in my office, not because I needed the validation, but because it reminded me that sometimes standing up for what's right actually works out. It doesn't always, and the process was exhausting and stressful, but in the end, the community came together and made the right call. The following winter, we got another major snowstorm in early December. This time, the HOA's new contracted service had the streets cleared within 4 hours of the snow stopping. I still went out and helped a few neighbors with their driveways, using just a shovel and some salt because my truck was out on paying jobs. Mrs. Henderson brought me hot chocolate while I was finishing her walkway. "You're a good man, Keith Nolan," she said. "This neighborhood is lucky to have you." "I'm lucky to have neighbors worth helping," I replied, and I meant it. That whole situation taught me something important about community and standing your ground. HOAs exist to maintain neighborhoods and protect property values, and that's a worthwhile goal when done properly. But when the rules become more important than the people they're supposed to serve, something's gone badly wrong. Patricia never understood that. She saw the covenants as absolute law and herself as the enforcer, never questioning whether blind enforcement actually served the community's best interests. When you find someone for helping their neighbors during an emergency, you've lost sight of what communities are supposed to be about. The new board got it right by focusing on reasonable enforcement that balanced rules with common sense. Neighborhoods aren't just collections of properties. They're collections of people, and sometimes people need help. A good HOA facilitates that. A bad one punishes it. I still live in Pine Ridge, and I still help my neighbors when they need it. I keep my landscaping business running smoothly, my insurance up to date, and my truck properly registered. And if another snowstorm hits and the contracted service can't keep up, I won't hesitate to fire up that plow and help clear driveways again. Because that's what neighbors do. That's what communities do. And no HOA covenant, no matter how precisely worded, should ever punish someone for doing the right thing during a crisis. The whole experience also taught me about the importance of documentation and having good legal help. If Marcus hadn't helped me navigate the HOA bylaws and build a proper case, I might have just paid the fine to avoid the hassle. A lot of people do that, which is how people like Patricia stay in power for years, issuing questionable fines that nobody challenges. By standing up and fighting back with facts and documentation, we didn't just overturn one unjust fine. We sparked a conversation about leadership and enforcement that led to real positive change in the neighborhood. Donald Pritchard and the new board implemented reforms that made the HOA more transparent and accountable. Residents now get monthly reports on HOA finances and activities. Enforcement decisions over $100 require board votes, not just the president's say-so. And there's a new appeals process that's clearer and more fair. All of that happened because I refused to pay an unjust fine for helping people during a snowstorm. Sometimes the small battles lead to bigger changes. I ran into Patricia once more, about a year after she moved out. It was at a home improvement store in Grand Rapids. We made eye contact across the aisle, and for a moment I thought she might just ignore me. Instead, she walked over. "I hope you're happy," she said. "Not angry, just tired. You got what you wanted." "I never wanted any of this," I replied honestly. "I just wanted to help my neighbors without getting fined for it. You made me look like a villain." "I didn't make you do anything, Patricia. You issued that fine. You sent those emails. You chose how to handle the situation at every step." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see she wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. Finally, she just shook her head and walked away. I never saw her again after that. I thought about that encounter a lot afterward. Part of me wondered if she ever understood what she'd done wrong, or if she still saw herself as the victim of an unfair rebellion. I guess it doesn't really matter. What matters is that the neighborhood is better off now, and people feel comfortable helping each other without fear of petty retaliation. The following spring, I organized a neighborhood cleanup day with the new HOA board's support. We picked up litter, trimmed common area plants, and generally spruced things up. About 40 residents showed up to help, and afterward we had a potluck in the community center. It was the kind of community event that had been rare under Patricia's leadership, and it felt good to see neighbors connecting and working together. Mrs. Henderson brought her famous apple pie. The Yamamotos brought homemade sushi. The Johnsons brought their baby, who was now a cheerful toddler getting into everything. People laughed, shared stories, and actually seemed to enjoy being part of the Pine Ridge community instead of just enduring it. Donald Pritchard pulled me aside during the potluck. "You know, that whole situation with Patricia was a pain at the time, but it really did change this neighborhood for the better," People are more engaged now. We've got residents volunteering for committees, attending meetings, actually participating. Before, everyone just tried to stay under the radar and avoid Patricia's attention. "I'm glad something good came out of it," I said. "Though I could have done without the stress. I bet. But you handled it the right way. You didn't back down, but you also didn't make it personal or petty. You stuck to the facts and let the community decide. That's leadership, even if you weren't trying to be a leader." I appreciated the sentiment, though I'd never thought of myself as any kind of leader. I was just a guy who ran a landscaping business and tried to be a decent neighbor. But I guess sometimes that's enough. My business kept growing. Word got around about what happened, and several people hired me specifically because they'd heard I was the guy who stood up to his HOA. I got jobs in 3 other neighborhoods in Grand Rapids, and my snow removal client list filled up completely for the next winter season. I hired 2 more employees to keep up with demand, both young guys from the area who needed good jobs and were willing to learn. I taught them not just how to plow and landscape, but how to treat customers right, how to go the extra mile, how to take pride in their work. The same lessons my dad had taught me when I started in this business 15 years ago. One of my new hires, a 23-year-old named Tyler, asked me about the HOA situation one day while we were installing a retaining wall for a client. "So you really got fined for helping people in a snowstorm?" he asked, sounding amazed. "Yep, $250 plus penalties." "That's insane. What kind of person does that?" "Someone who cares more about rules than people," I said. "It's easy to get caught up in enforcing policies and forget about why those policies exist in the first place." The parking rule was supposed to keep the neighborhood looking nice, not punish people for emergency help. "Did you ever think about just paying it to avoid the hassle?" "For about 5 minutes," I admitted. But it was wrong, and I knew if I let it go, she'd just keep doing stuff like that to other people. Sometimes you have to fight back, even when it's easier not to. Tyler nodded thoughtfully. "Good lesson. My mom's on her HOA board. I'm going to tell her that story. Maybe it'll help her think about things differently." That was when I realized the story had spread beyond Pine Ridge. People in other neighborhoods were hearing about it and thinking about their own HOAs, their own rules, their own community dynamics. Maybe some of them would make different choices because of what happened to me. Maybe some communities would be a little bit better because one person stood up to one petty tyrant and refused to back down. Or maybe I was overthinking it, and it was just a local drama that would be forgotten in a few years. Either way, I was satisfied with how things turned out. 2 years after the initial incident, Pine Ridge's HOA held elections for board positions. Several of the original board members had resigned or chosen not to run again, and there was a whole slate of new candidates. One of them approached me and asked if I'd consider running for a board seat. "You've already shown you care about this community and you're willing to stand up for what's right," she said. "We need people like that making decisions." I thought about it seriously for about a week before declining. Running a business took enough of my time and energy. I didn't want to add HOA board meetings and enforcement decisions to my plate. But I appreciated being asked, and I told her I'd support good candidates and stay engaged as a regular member. The elections brought in a diverse new board with representatives from different parts of the neighborhood and different age groups. They continued the reforms Pritchard had started and added some new initiatives, including a neighborhood watch program and a community garden on a vacant lot the HOA owned. The community garden idea actually came partly from my situation. During the debate about Patricia's enforcement style, several people had mentioned her opposition to visible vegetable gardens. The new board decided to embrace the idea by creating a shared space where anyone could grow vegetables, flowers, or herbs. It became incredibly popular, with families working little plots together and sharing harvests. I helped design the garden layout, using my landscaping expertise to plan the beds, install an irrigation system, and create pathways. I didn't charge for the design work, considering it my contribution to the community. The physical installation was a neighborhood volunteer effort that brought out dozens of people over 2 weekends in April. Mrs. Henderson claimed a small plot where she grew tomatoes and herbs. The Johnsons used their plot to teach their now 4-year-old about where food comes from. The Chens grew Asian vegetables they had trouble finding fresh at local stores. It became a genuine community gathering place, the opposite of the divisive, rule-focused atmosphere Patricia had cultivated. The community garden had a small plaque at the entrance that read, "Pine Ridge Community Garden Growing Together." I smiled every time I saw it, thinking about how far the neighborhood had come from those days of $250 fines for helping during snowstorms. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. My business prospered, my relationships with neighbors deepened, and Pine Ridge became the kind of community I'd hoped for when I first bought my house there. Not perfect, certainly. People still disagreed about things, and the HOA still had to enforce some rules. But it was done with common sense and compassion now, with an understanding that rules serve people, not the other way around. Every winter when the first major snow came, I'd fire up my truck and head out to handle my paying clients. But I'd always make time to help a few neighbors too, especially the elderly ones who struggled with the heavy lifting. The difference was that now nobody worried about fines or violations. The HOA explicitly supported residents helping each other, and that made all the difference. Mrs. Henderson passed away peacefully in her sleep 3 years after the incident, at the age of 86. The funeral was packed with neighbors and friends, and during the reception afterward, several people shared stories about her sharp wit and fierce loyalty to the people she cared about. One person mentioned how she'd stood up at that HOA meeting and defended me, calling the fine absurd and cruel. "Eleanor never backed down from a fight when she knew she was right," her daughter said during the eulogy. "And she never forgot the people who helped her when she needed it most." I thought about that cold January morning when I'd plowed her driveway so she could get to the pharmacy, how grateful she'd been, how she'd later stood up for me when I needed support. Small kindnesses rippling outward, creating connections and community. That's what neighborhoods were supposed to be about. The incident with Patricia and the HOA fine became something of a legend in Pine Ridge, the story that got told to new residents to explain the community's culture and values. It was always a little embarrassing to be at the center of neighborhood lore, but I understood why people told it. It represented a turning point, a moment when the community chose people over policies and came together to correct an injustice. Years later, I still live in that same house on Maple Court. My business is thriving. I've got a solid crew of good employees, and I've got relationships with neighbors that go way beyond just waving hello at the mailbox. We help each other out, look after each other's properties when someone's on vacation, organize block parties and community events. The HOA still exists, still enforces rules, still collects dues and maintains common areas. But it does so in a way that serves the community instead of controlling it. Board members see themselves as facilitators rather than enforcers. Residents feel comfortable questioning decisions and suggesting improvements. It's not perfect, but it's functional and fair. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I just paid that initial $250 fine and moved on with my life. Patricia would have stayed in power. Her enforcement style would have continued. The neighborhood would have remained a place where people kept their heads down and avoided attention rather than building genuine community. One person standing up to an unjust fine changed all of that. Not because I'm special or brave or particularly noble. Just because I recognized something was wrong and refused to accept it. And because when I took that stand, the community backed me up and demanded better leadership. That's the real lesson from the whole situation. Communities are what we make them. HOA, neighborhoods, towns, cities, they all function based on the collective choices of the people in them. When enough people decide that something isn't right and work together to change it, change actually happens. It won't always be easy. It definitely wasn't easy for me. The stress of fighting the fine, dealing with Patricia's escalating responses, preparing for the hearing and the membership vote, all of that took a toll. There were moments when I questioned whether it was worth the hassle over a couple $100, but it was never really about the money. It was about principle, about justice, about the kind of community I wanted to live in. And standing up for those things, even when it's difficult and uncomfortable, that's how we create communities worth living in. So that's my story. The time I got threatened by my HOA for parking during an emergency while I was literally plowing their streets for free. It started with a snowstorm, a diesel truck with a plow blade, and a choice to help neighbors who needed it. It escalated into a battle with an overzealous HOA president who couldn't see past her own rigid interpretation of parking rules. And it ended with a community coming together, removing a problematic leader, implementing real reforms, and becoming a genuinely better place to live. All because one person refused to accept an unjust fine, and other people decided to support that stand. I still plow snow every winter. I still help my neighbors when they need it. And I never worry about getting fined for it anymore, because the community decided what kind of neighborhood Pine Ridge should be. A place where people help each other, where rules serve rather than constrain, where common sense and compassion matter more than rigid enforcement. That cold January morning when I first fired up my truck to help clear driveways, I never imagined it would lead to all of this. But I'm glad it did. Because Pine Ridge is a better place now, and I'm proud to be part of a community that chose to stand up for what's right.